Well, welcome back. This is day 4 of the Science Cries Out Creation seminar, and we're glad you're here. If you're watching on replay, thanks for coming to the replays. And we've talked in the last 3 days about creation and design. We've talked about the fall and then how that related to biology and the fossils, mostly with mutation and selection and so on. We showed that you can't get all of the living things you have today simply by mutation and selection, but it's taken the evidence seems to indicate that there is an intelligent designer of life, and that when the fall happened, that things started falling apart, you might say, with disease and sickness entering into the world at that point in time. So all of that fits. Genesis 1 and 2, just as a quick review, Genesis 1 and 2 is creation theme, and we look at science and we see design there. Genesis 3 to 5, we see the fall, the entrance of sin and death into the world. And what do we see in the world around us? We see death and examples of a lot of devastation in this world around us, disease and death and so on. And so today what we're going to be looking at is evidence of the flood. Genesis 6 through 8 talks about a worldwide flood in the time of Noah, and the description that's given there is very clear, very graphic, very detailed, as Dave will be talking about today. And there's also evidence in the rock layers themselves, in the geology. And so Dave's going to be talking today about the evidence of the flood, primarily from geology and from how it relates to the scriptural account. If you have questions, you may type them into the chat or email us, and hopefully we can answer your questions that way. So Dave, you ready?
Yes, I am. So there we go. All right. So basically, discover creation, worship the creator. Can you do that with rocks? Well, yeah. Yes, you can. God's the creator of all things. And so we're going to be talking about it. Mary Jo already went over the fact that the general outline of the whole biblical Genesis 1 through 11. And what we're talking about right now is the flood and destruction. We talked yesterday about the fossil record, and it's the flood and destruction that we're looking at today that has preserved most all of those fossils. So that's the topic today. Flood destruction, Genesis 6 through 8. We might also call this program specific of this series, Noah's flood, fiction or reality? I believe it's reality, and I'm going to give you very good reasons why to believe that. I remember one time doing a creation presentation, a student asked right afterwards, how did Noah fit all those stinking animals on board that tiny boat? I wasn't even talking about the flood, but he made the connection. So I asked him a question. Before I answer that, could you please tell me how big that tiny boat was? He said, well, I haven't looked into it, but certainly those animals could not have fit. I said, well, at least could you tell me how many animals fit on board that boat? He said, well, I haven't looked into that either, but certainly they could not have fit. And so my answer to him was, what you're trying to tell me is that an unknown number of animals can't fit on board a boat of unknown size. And some of the students around him began chuckling at that. So anyhow, they weren't chuckling at me, but they were at him. But anyhow, how did Noah get all those stinking animals on board? Well, that wasn't a tiny boat. And the biblical dimensions is 300 cubits long. That means it's a great big boat, would have been about 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. All of a sudden you realize, hold on, this is not something small whatsoever. So all the animals could easily have fit on board that boat. And there are calculations which actually show the size of that ark compared to the number of animals that had to go on board. The flood is one of the most documented biblical events. And it's not just in the Bible where you see it at all. It's or in the Genesis. You also see it in other books of the Bible too. Many other chapters. New Testament authors accept the flood as reality, and even Jesus accepted it as fact. So if Jesus could accept it as fact, I think I could too. All right. There's also much archaeological evidence from around the world that that flood was a reality. For instance, Sumerian king list names kings who reigned for long periods of time. Then a great flood came. And after the flood, Sumerian kings ruled for much shorter periods of time. Do you realize that fits very well with the record in the Bible, which shows that before the flood, the patriarchs lived very long periods of time. After the flood, the patriarchs didn't live nearly as long. The lifespans went down, 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 down until today. If you live to be 100 years old, you're doing really well. And so that fits. Babylonian documents also talk about the same flood. For instance, there's one that's called the Gilgamesh Epic. The 11th chapter talks about an ark. Animals taken on board the ark, birds sent out during the flood, ark landed on a mountain, sacrifice offered. Those are exact points that you find in the account given in Genesis 6 through 8. And so people say, well, that's so close. Maybe the biblical history was borrowed from what they considered the more ancient Gilgamesh epic. That might be a problem, but it isn't. And the reason is that when you look at around the world, you find the problems that so many of the accounts have where they deviate from a more precise account of Noah's day. For instance, the Gilgamesh Ark is shaped like a cube. I would not like to be in that on rough seas during the flood. I'd really get seasick. All right, there are 270 other flood legends from around the world. But there's one major distinctive about all of these is that detail. And do you realize also that the Chinese word for boat is made up of smaller characters, 8 mouths in a vessel? 8. How many people went on board the Noah's Ark? Turns out 8. 8 mouths, okay, in a vessel. Now, is that coincidental? Well, there's evidence that no, it's not coincidental whatsoever. And in fact, there are many other words, deceiver, woman, a garden, and a snake, smaller words in the Chinese language. It all indicates that the Chinese at least had a record of the flood, and that dictated even what they drew in the characters of the writing. So the biblical record probably first. There's another book that's been just out. We just received it in our office a month and a half ago. It's called Echoes of Ararat. And what it is a collection of over 300 flood legends just from North and South America. And add that to 270 other flood legends from around the world. And that all speaks that there was some kind of event that people from all over the world could talk about. And in fact, many of those were from places where they never had missionary activity. Anyhow, Noah's ship log, like I was saying, stands out above all the other supposed accounts. Why? Look at the specific dates. I call this Noah's ship log because it looks like Noah is writing this down as it occurs. It says in Genesis 7:11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. Whew, that's specific. On the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the skies were open. It actually is detailed in the fact that there are 2 sources of water, it looks like. Again, specific dates, and those dates don't stop just right there. And in fact, it tells you what year, month, and day so many things happen. When the ark grounds on the mountain, when the tops of the mountains are seen, when birds are sent out, when the face of the ground was dry, and even when Noah was instructed to leave the ark. And that was second year. And you can find out that Noah was on that boat for approximately 371 days, more than a year. This is the specific dates. And I call it Noah's ship log because he's writing it. Now, all of these other accounts are probably being borrowed from Noah's ship log. Okay, that's what I would expect. Well, it was not just a little bit of rain. According to the Bible, the windows of heaven were opened. I wonder what that looked like. You might not even be able to see it. The fountains of the great deep also opened up. That could have been great big water geysers, steam fans, all this kind of stuff, perhaps. Some people suggest volcanic activity. Well, that was part of the flood as well, because there's motion going on, and that could cause certain volcanic reactions. Well, in the biblical record, this is a worldwide flood. It's not some local flood. There are certain Bible colleges and seminaries, etc., and of course, secular people, if they believe at all in the flood, would say, oh, it was just a local flood, just killed the people in the Mesopotamian region. Well, no, it's very much worldwide. As Ken Ham puts it, it's like putting a basketball into a swimming pool and submerging it. That kind of a flood. It's not a local flood. Let me give you some reasons why. Why, if it's a local flood, do you need a great big ark with all those animals? Okay, why not just herd those animals a little ways away? Okay, so local floods don't need a great big ark like that. The inclusive language of destruction, where it says in the scripture, all flesh perish from under heaven. That is, that which is not on the ark, and in the waters where they can survive as well. Why take birds on the ark if this is some local event? They could just fly off a little ways. No problem whatsoever there, because it was a global flood. They didn't have a place to land. The water also covers the tops of the tallest mountains. And if I cover the top of the tallest mountain here in Colorado, what does that do to most of the rest of the world? As Bill Cosby used to say, how long can you tread water? But anyhow, it was definitely a global flood because water does not stand up in one big column. And here's where a skeptic comes in and says, ha ha, that means we know it was a myth in the Bible about this flood, because we don't have enough water to cover the top of the tallest mountains. And Everest is so tall, there's no way we have that amount of water. Well, when you look at the top of the tallest mountains, it's rather interesting to note that in this case, in Banff, you can clearly see these layers. These are sedimentary rocks put down by moving water, and they contain fossils. Even the top or the summit of the Everest, last 1,000 feet, have rock layers put down by water containing fossils. Now that in itself does not prove Noah's flood, but it gives good circumstantial evidence for that. Secular geologists will say, oh yeah, that mountain was underwater at one time, but over a process of millions and millions of years, they were pushed up to their present position. So we see the same evidence, but we have different interpretation, don't we? In other words, we have different lenses that we are actually viewing the evidence through. Well, the whole duration of the flood being over a year, that's not a local flood. Local floods come and go very quickly. But over a year, nope, a global flood. Then the promise of the rainbow. God sent the rainbow. What was that promise? He's never going to flood the earth again like that. And the promise of his covenant with the people as well. All right. There's also much geologic evidence for a worldwide flood, and we're going to get into that. And when we look at the geological layers, there's evidence of that flood. But you have to understand, two different people look at the very same rock layers through different color lenses or filters. And one person would see one thing, another one would see something else. Okay, when I look at that picture right there in Southern California, there's a rock layer. One of the lenses says, oh, these rocks were put down over millions of years. But wait a minute, I look at it through a different lens, and I see these great big water-worn boulders like you're looking at. That one in the center is about the size of a large dump truck. So what does this tell me? It takes a major current, high velocity and deep, to move, transport, and deposit these kind of rocks. This, to me, indicates there is a worldwide flood. In another spot, you see these boulder layers made up of boulders, half the size of that Jeep down there. And that tells me there are high velocity pulsating currents. You get one layer after another, after another, after another. Again, catastrophic processes with lots of water, which fits with Noah's flood. In another spot, you see this boulder material, the black material on your left, forcing its way into the layers of sandstone on your right. Notice how the sandstone is bent up and then also down when this material is being pushed into the sediment like a fist into a layer cake. Well, that layer cake has to be soft in order for that to happen. And so the millions of years that standard geologists would assume that it took to make those sandstone layers on your right could not have existed. That would have been solid rock, and this penetration could not have happened. Again, we're just eliminating another 100 million years of geologic history. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. That's there in eastern Washington. It was a gorgeous mountain, a beautiful place to go visit. And, have a picnic, have a cabin. But then they started noticing something about that mountain. It was beginning to shake a little bit, earthquakes, beginning to bulge. This mountain began bulging closer to May 18th, 1980, between 18 to 40 feet per day. So if the mountain near you is bulging towards you between 18 and 40 feet per day, my advice to you is run quickly, get out of there, okay? Anyhow, sure enough, as geologists began to predict, that mountain began to erupt on May 18th. And what you're seeing is the before and after of Mount St. Helens. We lost a lot of mountain that day, but we gained an awful lot of knowledge about sedimentation and layers formation down below where that mountain had collapsed because of the volcanic eruption. All right, so let's look at these layers underneath here. So this is the after. Remember, the mountain kind of went up like a cone, but 1/3 of the mountain is gone. A lot of it deposited downstream. Part of it became left a great big hole and then collapsed down into it, and the volcanic ash spread across several states. That, we think, was a great big volcano. But if you go on one of our Yellowstone National Park tours, you're going to find out that even Mount St. Helens is like a little pop gun compared to Yellowstone National Park. If you think about the amount of ejectite out of Mount St. Helens being about the end of the amount, about the end of your little finger, the amount out of Yellowstone was drastically more, 5,000 to 6,000 times as much. It would have occupied a cube taller, broader, and deeper than I am wide and tall. Okay, it was amazing. Anyhow, we learned a lot about rock formations. See those layers there? They are all formed not over millions of years as one type of filter might suggest, but they all happen in parts of 3 days. That's because of Mount St. Helens. And we know that from eyewitness reports. It doesn't take long for layers to form. I've been at the Badlands. You know what they tell you there now? They tell you that those layers that you see at the Badlands took millions and millions of years to form. Well, if you ask the ranger, well, ranger, didn't we see the same type of layers form at Mount St. Helens in 1 day? Your likely answer would be, yeah, but Mount St. Helens is a special case. Maybe this is a special case too. Anyhow, so it doesn't take long for layers to form, but the ranger can come back and say, well, yeah, but look at that erosion. You can't get that type and broadness of erosion in a period of days, or it takes millions of years. Well, not really. Secondary steam blasts at Mount St. Helens produce steam pits, and they have the same badland topography. And that all happened in part of one afternoon. So no, even badlands don't take long to form if the conditions are just right, and the conditions were just right at Mount St. Helens. Well, we also see canyon formation. Secular geologists, if they didn't know what happened on May 18th, 1980, might conclude that that canyon was formed over millions of years by their little tiny stream cutting out grain of sand by grain of sand. But no, eyewitness reports tell us that that entire canyon, which goes for 8 miles back there, was mostly carved in 1 day by a catastrophic flow of water due to glaciers melting on the summit of Mount St. Helens. So no, canyons don't take long, and we saw that as an example from Mount St. Helens. National Geographic said it this way: you'd expect a hard rock canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old, says Peter Frenzen, monument scientist, but this was cut in less than a decade. Whoa, less than 10 years. The bulk of it in 1 day. And so even National Geographic mentioned that. Can you imagine, with that little bit of water from those glaciers melted, carving out a big canyon, what would happen in Noah's flood when you have all the waters of the flood covering the entire world? You have fountains of the great deep opening up, huge tsunamis, etc. A lot more water, a lot more force. What kind of damage can you see then? And that could give us a lot of the erosional features we see on Earth, including the planing off of original mountain areas. Okay, then the planing off and the flood went to and fro, back and forth across the world. And then pretty soon, those floodwaters, that they settle down a little bit, or maybe even a high velocity flows, could produce big layers of mud. And here's the principle of geology for you. When you see mud, think flood. Got that? See mud, think flood. So see petrified mud, yeah, think mud. Or think flood right here. This is Bryce Canyon National Park. Again, many layers of preserved mud. And you go to the Colorado National Monument, look at those sandstone formations. This is sand mud. Some people say they were wind deposited sands. No, they weren't. There's evidence that it was actually deposited by moving water, and that's part of another lecture. And if you want to know more about that, contact me. But the ranger would say it took then, after the layers were put down, which I say happened in a very short time, they would say it took millions of years to carve this big canyon. Time is not the hero of the plot, it's the conditions. And look at this sand mud, think flood, right? But what carved these things, okay? Well, in another spot at the Colorado National Monument, you'll see a canyon within a canyon. So that indicates a whole lot more water going down through there at one time. And then, as it channelized, what it did was form a deeper inner canyon as well. Oh, by the way, AOI has produced a wonderful tour app of Colorado National Monument. And you can download it from your Google Play for Android, or you can download it onto your iPhones as well. But we also just recently completed a very extensive, like this one is, of the Colorado National Monument, extensive tour app of Yellowstone National Park. You'll want to download that one as well. And so, so we thank God for the ability to be able to create those very extensive tour apps from a creationist perspective. You know, moving water can do a lot of damage in a short time. At one time, they thought they might lose the dam at Glen Canyon Dam in Utah, which backs up Lake Powell. Lake Powell goes for about 180 miles upstream. At the dam, it was probably 600 feet deep or more. And all of a sudden, they had a malfunction of one of the tubes that was a runoff in a higher flood season. And that water carved out a cubic basketball court of material in less than a couple hours. And so it shows what moving water can do in a short period of time. And there are physics principles of why that works. Okay, but let's go to things we see in the natural world. You go to Eastern Washington, you look at the scenery there, and people say, oh, that's beautiful, that's beautiful. What they don't realize is this area is called Dry Falls for very good reason. It was a waterfall in this area. What do you mean, waterfall? This is flat as a pancake across there. What gives here? Well, it turns out that somebody by the name of J. Harlan Bretz began seeing evidence of a major water flow through here, and that this indeed was a great big ancient waterfall. And they ignored him for years and years and years until another geologist who was working near Missoula, Montana, many, many, many miles away, noted shorelines of an ancient lake above the city of Missoula, Montana. And he finally realized there was a big inland sea there. And then the research started showing that sure enough, there was an ice dam that blocked the Columbia River, a certain portion of it, way up there, and formed this huge glacial lake, Missoula, that would have drowned Missoula's present position to a depth of 900 feet. And when this glacial ice dam collapsed, all of a sudden, all that water went downstream, taking the remaining part of the ice with it, and taking out the lake on the left called the Lake Columbia, and all of that ended up dumping into the Columbia Gorge and finally into the ocean. And there's evidence for that all along the way. Okay, so all of that water, all the way, would have drowned Portland to a depth of over 400 feet. Okay, so that's a lot of water. And you can read about it in one of the books we have here called The Global Flood by Dr. John Morris. And that's a very good book. But you can see the shoreline of this ancient sea, inland sea, and probably no more than a few thousands of years old, for that matter. And then all of a sudden, this lake catastrophically drained, leaving the shorelines behind. Now, those aren't actual shorelines. Those are water lines, like a river would make as it is losing its amount of water being pushed out to the sea. All right. So Dry Falls would have looked kind of like this. And I have a hard time even visualizing what it would have been. But from horizon to horizon, you would look, and what would you see? A huge waterfall, up to 700 feet deep, according to some of my research. 700 feet deep, coming at whoever's downstream at 65 miles per hour. Here's another good case to run, get out of there. Well, better yet, take an airplane. All right. Here's the remnant of it. You can see these channels now called channeled scablands in eastern Washington. Keep in mind that within 24 to 48 hours, That's the time it took to drain that lake. These huge channels would have been formed, and that whole lake would have virtually dissipated. This is a channel downstream, and you see it's 6 miles wide, 18 to 22 miles long, and up to 900 feet deep. According to standard geology, this channel was not there, likely prior to this Missoula flood. All right. You go to Palouse Falls in eastern Washington, and what do you find? You find what you find at Palouse Falls. What you find at Palouse Falls is a huge waterfall going down, and all you see is a remnant of it right now. But look at this big plunge pool. Look at the big plunge pool. That falls is 180 feet high. And that 180-foot high waterfall produces plunge pool here. And but it was a lot bigger amount of water at one time. You might ask, how much water? Well, look at the rolling hills here and look at the gravel deposits below it. That would mean that this particular flood was over the top of these mountains. And this is just a remnant of the amount of water that was there in the past. Looking downstream from Dry Falls, you see a big canyon. According to standard geology, that canyon was not there prior to the collapse of Lake Missoula. Now it is 1,300 feet deep and goes for 6 miles before it hits the Snake River Canyon, and then eventually drains all the way down into the Columbia Gorge of the Columbia River. Downstream from this flood, we see Quincy Basin in Washington, and there you see a pile of boulders that you'd expect from a big flood, wouldn't you? The boulders, like the one in the center with the students on top of, is about the size of a house, but there are granite boulders, basalt boulders. It looks like a potato field, but if you drill down this potato field, go another 200 to 300 feet, you will still encounter these monster boulders. That's what a lot of water can do, move a lot of great big boulders. So when I go around the world, different parts of the country, like around Escalante, Utah, if you're with me, I'll be driving by there and all of a sudden I'll point out boulders. And everybody will know after about 5 times what I'm talking about. But these boulders to me indicate major water flow. Interestingly, these boulders near Escalante, Utah are at the top of a great big canyon. So that water probably not only carved out the canyon with those boulders, but deposited the boulders at the top. And so again, boulders are very important things to notice when you're around the country. Uh-oh, boulders! This is near Twin Falls, Idaho. Oh, wait a minute. This isn't Missoula flood. This is another boulder field from something else. What caused those boulders? Well, upstream, you find boulders as well. This is the size of the boulders, about the size of our friend Diane Galbraith and her husband's Suburban. It looks like a potato field in this part of Idaho. But all that water was moving those boulders, rolling them around, etc. And it's now associated with the shorelines that are found around Salt Lake City. And so there was a great big lake drowning Salt Lake City and the present Great Salt Lake that catastrophically drained. When all that water drained down, it would have formed all of the Snake River Canyon. And so can you imagine that particular shoreline, 1,000 feet above the Great Salt Lake, collapsing all in one big event? And the water cascading downstream would carve the big canyon called the Snake River Canyon. This is at Twin Falls. Again, look at that huge plunge pool. But even on flood season, there isn't that much water to carve that big canyon or leave the big plunge fields. And by the way, those boulders that I showed you the size of automobiles, those are on top of the canyon, indicating that the water depth for this Lake Bonneville collapsing would have been at least 200 feet above the canyon rim. That's a lot of water. That's going to eventually go down the Snake River below and then add to the carving of the Columbia Gorge. Well, what we're looking at is a lot more water in the past than what we see today. Well, Dury, who's a geomorphologist, had actually looked at that and was concerned because where he looked, almost all of the rivers and streams in the world were what he called underfed. That means the present river channel or stream channel is not sufficient to carve such a big canyon. So there must have been much more water. And so that was Dury. You can look that one up if you want. Well, I mentioned a couple here in just Western United States of these major flooding, but there's also another flood that was 10 times larger than the flood at Missoula. You can look for that in Science and Science Magazine. And whole mountain ridges were left as ripple marks, and great big canyons formed with a huge collapse of a lake up in Siberia. Let's go to Wave Rock in Australia. You see the same thing. This goes for 7 miles. Again, not a drop of water really goes over it today, maybe a little bit, but there was a lot more water over Wave Rock at one time. So what I'm saying is, to get these particular formation, time is not the hero of the plot. The conditions are more important. All right. So was Darwin wrong about geology? In some areas, he certainly was. Like, for instance, he sailed around the, you might say, the shorelines of the Pacific and South America. And what did he see? He saw great big volcanic deposits. And he thought, oh, it must have taken eons of time to form those deposits. Well, no, we saw the same thing in one day at Mount St. Helens. Well, look at that great big river channel of the Santa Cruz River. Wow, they actually took a boat, a smaller boat, up that river, and he thought, oh, grain of sand, that grain over millions of years, grain of sand at a time, this entire gorge was cut out through solid volcanic basalt. But you know what? He missed a few things. He missed what was on top of here, and he missed these things down here. What did he miss? Boulders. That tells me there's a lot more water going down through there at one time. So when you see boulders, look for lakes collapsing upstream. And I believe they now found one such lake up above this river basin. All right, so lots of water can carve out great big canyons. When I look at formations like this, you know what I see? I see evidence of a flood, major evidence for a flood. I go to the Canyonlands National Park, and this is much greater scale than what we saw at Dry Falls in eastern Washington. And it's 18 miles from where I'm standing, taking this picture to the other rim. What does that give me an indication of? A huge volume of water flowing through there. So I see flood written over that. When I look at the layers in the Grand Canyon, I see it through a different filter. I see evidence of the flood all over. But you'll hear somebody else giving you a different interpretation through a different colored lens. And they say, oh, these layers in the Grand Canyon were put down over millions and millions of years, proven by radioactive decay dating, which is suspect right now. And then the carving that canyon took millions of years, grain of sand by grain of sand. I saw a different picture. I saw a collapse of a great big lake upstream, or even the runoff of the waters from Noah's flood. As it says in Psalm 104, the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. And by the way, that gives you an answer to the skeptic who says we don't have enough water to cover, say, Mount Everest or other tall mountains. Well, the Bible has the answer. The mountains rose up probably pretty quickly. And the valleys sank down. The waters didn't have to go anywhere. We have plenty of water on planet Earth to cover the entire world by water. In fact, if you were to smooth out planet Earth, kind of like a soccer ball, flatten down the mountains, etc., we would have enough water right here on planet Earth to flood the entire world by approximately 1.5 miles deep of water. Most people don't realize that. And then there's even more water underneath the continental plates. Wow, 3 times the amount of water in our oceans today. So yeah, there's no problem with the amount of water, period. By the way, that big boulder pile that I first showed you with the size, that one boulder about the size of a dump truck, that is actually found downstream from the Grand Canyon. And it would tell me that the collapsing lake or Noah's runoff floodwaters would be able to deposit all those boulders very, very quickly. Maybe possibly weeks to carve this great big canyon that we are told takes millions and millions of years. Well, let's go to another spot. Black Canyon of the Gunnison. This is, if you were to jump right here from this point to the bottom of the river, it'll take a while to get there. 1,600 feet below you is the river. And look at this narrow little canyon. And standard geology, one color of lenses would say, ooh, it took millions of years for that Gunnison River to carve that canyon. Well, guess what? I have a different lens. I would look at that and say, no, that looks like a tear fault. It looks like there was a big earthquake, and that earthquake was shaking around like this and time it. How long does it take to make a canyon? All of a sudden, all this stuff tore. That can happen in minutes. Doesn't take millions of years. And then the water that was in the present Gunnison River upstream washes it out. And so the canyon did not, was not caused by erosion, but by an earthquake, and it caused the river, not vice versa. Let's go to Sierra Nevada Mountains, California. I've been there looking at this basalt, looking at the mountains above there, but then I started noticing something. I noticed what looked like an island and a water flow channel way back here. And I said, that means below this cliff, there should be evidence of water movement. And climbing down, guess what you find? Sculpted basalt, indicating much, much, much more water coming down through there catastrophically. Again, let's go to Death Valley here. We find this boulder material. This is significant here. And the reason for it is when lakes collapse and bring with it lots of water, it's not just water. Pretty soon, in a matter of seconds, that water now contains all kinds of mud and grit and sand and boulders, okay? And sometimes, if it's going fast enough, boulders the size of automobiles. And all of a sudden, all this material is traveling downstream at a high rate, maybe 60, 70 miles per hour. But that material has to stop somewhere. At one of the lowest elevations is where it's going to stop. And Death Valley today is the lowest elevation here in the United States. And you can just see this, not water, but cement slurry stopped right here. This is a big cement dump. In fact, the cement actually coated the Mosaic Canyon with its cement as it came through here. Then downstream, it deposited these great big piles of cement slurry, a cement dump. And that fits that whole model so beautifully, okay? And so what do I see here? I see evidence of a major flood wherever I look. But the geologist ranger said, wait a minute, no, we don't have a flood giving those layers. After all of those layers have been dated by radioactive decay dating methods, and these are very accurate. Well, it turns out that there's only a couple spots in the Grand Canyon that you can date those layers. So that statement that the ranger makes is false already. All right. But then you ask the ranger, well, how do you know how accurate these dating methods are? He usually doesn't really know for sure, because the only way to date accurately is if you know the age. You have to know the age of the rock to see if you have a accurate date. So let's date something of known age and see how close we are. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. After that, within 30 years, a volcanic lava dome had built up inside of the crater of Mount St. Helens. So they decided to date that volcanic lava that's building up inside here. And guess what? When they sent it to the lab, they didn't get 30 years. They got dates ranging from 340,000 years to 2.8 million years. That's on something they know the age of. Boy, something's wrong. They're way off on that one. Same thing in New Zealand. Again, similar types of dates. In Hawaii, there were recent volcanic lava flows that they knew when occurred, but they were dated from 3 million to 1 billion years old. Something's drastically wrong. And so you look at the Grand Canyon, you find out that these recent volcanic lava flows that actually flowed down into the canyon at one time were dated. But look at the numbers here. These numbers give you dates of this recent volcanic lava flow of at least as old and up to twice as old as the rock layers underneath the entire canyon. So something is drastically wrong here, correct? So ask the ranger what gives. And I did ask. I asked him if rocks of known age will give you unreliable dates, then how do you trust the same methods, I should say, to give you accurate dates on rocks of known age? He had never had an answer. But the next year I saw the same ranger and I asked him the same questions. He said, "Oh, you again." He said, "But I found out you're 100% right." Well, then why is he giving the same ranger talk? He said, "Well, it's been shown that these methods are not accurate on recent events." I said, "Really?" And then I just basically stated this. Then how do you rely on them to give you accurate results on unknown ages? Anyhow, and so I see a different picture when I look at the Grand Canyon. I see evidence of a flood. I see evidence of mass burial around the world too. Like for instance, these clams, they're all whole. When a clam normally dies, the shell's open. The fact that they're not open tells me they were buried deeply, not any chance to dig their way out. Okay, there's one of the whole clams right there. All right, more whole clams, again, found around the world, indicating what? Rapid burial. That fits with the flood. When you see mass burials, think flood. Another mass burial is in the Grand Canyon. There they find these fossils of what are called nautiloids, and they're long cigar-looking fossils. Some of them are 3 inches long, some of them are 3 feet long. But the fact in the canyon, they seem to be oriented in a particular direction. So instead of a slow and gradual, calm sea environment, like the rangers say, that's their filter, it was actually in a current. And so a nautiloid was probably occupied by a squid. There's millions of them, mostly pointing the same direction, being sorted by water current. All right. If you want to know more about that, get this book, Your Guide to the Grand Canyon. It's even better than taking me to the Grand Canyon, actually, because my laser pointer, when I'm talking about the stuff across the canyon, doesn't do it justice. Okay, you won't see it. Whereas this book has all kinds of dozens and dozens of fold-out pages that circle what you're looking at and what the significance of that is. Amazing resource for you. But you can also get the very same type of guidebook on Bryce and Zion National Park, let's see, and Yellowstone National Park as well. And so you may want to get that series, or also get our app on Yellowstone National Park and on the Colorado National Monument. And later, let's see what we can produce here pretty quickly. All right. You go up to Wyoming, again, you see mass burial, which fits with the flood. Here you see a slab of 360 fish, not a fin out of place. That tells me they were buried very rapidly. Otherwise, that fish would have decayed. You would not recognize it even as a fish, even after a short period of time. And there were bigger fish, there were little fish, there were palm fronds 10 feet long with fish on it. Okay, no decay, indicating rapid burial. Well, how rapid was the burial? Well, that guy's eating his lunch when both of them got trapped. Again, mass burial and rapid burial. That is evidence of Noah's flood. You go to Dinosaur National Park, you see more of that. 92 different or 92 dinosaurs preserved at Dinosaur National Park. Looks like a great big dump of dinosaurs from a massive flood that happened. And some of these dinosaurs were ripped apart. Okay. Now, what kind of current does it take, say, to rip apart a 70-ton dinosaur? One that fits with Noah's flood. All right. And so again, think flood when you see petrified mud. And when I look at these rock layers, I actually get hungry. What do I see? Evidence of the flood. But I also get hungry because I think about rock layers like these here in this schematic diagram as pancakes, big, broad pancakes. Some have blueberries in them, pecans, all kinds of stuff, dripping with syrup over the butter. I get hungry, right? But what would you think if our analogy of rock layers and pancakes be true, if you found one petrified tree going through all of those pancakes? You'd say, hold on, hold on, hold on. If this tree was millions of years old, or let's say if this tree was buried by sediments representing millions of years of deposition, then what would we expect? That tree would have rotted totally. That indicates that it was ripped up and planted there. Okay, notice also in this schematic diagram, there are no roots underneath. If it was buried where it was standing, guess what? You would find roots penetrating below, but that's not what we find sometimes. All right, so these particular trees going up through multiple pancakes is found even in the United States. And there you see one of the logs right here. Here's another log here. There's one over here. There's a whole bunch of these going through multiple layers, multiple pancake layers, okay? Again, it tells me that the flood was genuine. This tree was not millions and millions of years old at all, but instead was buried quite rapidly. All right. And so you want to look up Juby log if you want to know more about that. In general, these kind of trees that penetrates many, many pancakes or rock layers are called polystrate trees or polystrate fossils. And basically that means they go through many strata, many layers. All right. That fits with Noah's flood, doesn't it? All right, now let's go back to our analogy again. What if you noted in the rock layers that the bottom pancake somehow fluidized and poked its way up through all of those supposed other millions and millions of years of other pancake layers? You would say, wait a minute, if that poked its way through, like this schematic diagram shows, then those layers had to have been soft, and those millions of years could not exist. Well, that's what happens. Kodachrome Basin in Utah. This is the national park diagram of what they see here. You see the bottom pancake pushing it its way up through all of these other layers, right up through all the pancakes and through the butter and the syrup on top. Here's one right here. and the root of that is way down below. Here's another one of them right up into here. That indicates what? This material below was still soft, and so was this material when it came pushing up through there. This fits with hydraulic activity during a flood. There's nothing in slow and gradual geologic formation that you can make a case for here. All right, it fits that flood. Well, if you have a worldwide flood, think about currents, 150 miles per hour, 1,000 feet deep. It's going to really tear up a lot of things, giving you mountain ranges that were there, but now planed off. And that is the great conformity right here. Planed off mountain range, and then sandstone on top. Well, what's interesting is this is as the floodwaters began to carry particles, deposit particles, this layer was put down on top of this planed off mountain. All right, hold on. This is a type of a sandstone layer. I want you to understand this was not some local flood that did it. And in fact, this is the type of sandstone that has a correlation to the Tapete sandstone in the Grand Canyon. And there you see in the Tapete sandstone, definitely not wind deposited when you see a boulder that size in it. And this boulder comes from a rock layer below. It's called the Shanumu quartzite in geology. Again, you see evidence of rapid water movement, depositing material. But the Tapete doesn't stop there. It goes all the way from Colorado Springs, where we first encountered it. And then now you also find it in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, the Tapete sandstone right above the inner gorge. But that same sandstone goes all the way down into New Mexico, as far east as the eastern seaboard as well. But look at this, it goes clear across. It's found on the top of Moran Peak in the Grand Tetons and all the way across Canada, north of Greenland. That is one monster pancake layer, isn't it? Been eroded away in a few spots like here. But what's it telling you? This was not some local flood. It's a global flood. We find the same thing with limestones, covering great big areas as well. Same pancake. One pancake is the Niobrara Formation. You find it in Colorado, near Colorado Springs, the Glen Eyrie. It covers much of the eastern United States, but it doesn't stop at the ocean. It goes across the ocean, is found as and called the White Cliffs of Dover. It's now found in Israel and Spain and other places too. This is an even more monster pancake indicating worldwide flood. Nothing slow and gradual about those ponds, those particular pancakes being put down gradually. Well, it turns out that the most documented biblical event, the most documented one, is supported by much archaeological evidence and geologic evidence, as well as cultures around the world. And so, is Noah's flood fact, fiction, reality? I say it's reality. Okay, I say it's reality, and the geologic evidence supports that. Years ago, I would never have said such a thing until I started doing my own research. And I began to see evidence all over in different places that I went. So it's a reality. And keep in mind that the Genesis chapter 6 through 8 are probably the most contested chapters in the Bible because of a flood. Ooh, can you really accept the flood? Well, yeah, if they're the most contested chapters of the Bible and they're true, guess what? It makes me believe the rest of the Bible too. And so I take seriously the biblical account that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and that there will be a coming judgment. But keep in mind, whenever God sends judgment, we know from past things in history that God sends a way of escape for that judgment. It was Noah's Ark the one time. Today, the new Ark is the cross and what Jesus Christ did on that cross on our behalf. And so I would take this very seriously. And I encourage any of our readers, any of our listeners to do the very same thing. Take it seriously. God gives us a way of escaping the coming judgment. You know, God gives us a way to escape. That just shows his grace. And I like to tie that in, his grace of God, into this whole presentation. Because a lot of people think that God's grace is only in New Testament. No, it's even found in the flood in other places in the Old Testament as well. For instance, before the flood, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That word favor is grace. God had Noah build the ark for protection for those who believe, and even the animals that he cared for. That's God's grace. Noah's wife, his sons and daughter-in-laws get to go on board that ark. How would you feel if your daughter-in-law couldn't go, or son-in-law? Wouldn't that be a sad thing? God is present with Noah. He says to Noah, come in to the ark. What does that mean? It's positional. God is in the ark, okay? Beckoning Noah in. And then God closes the door. He didn't have Noah do it. I think that he didn't want Noah to think he shut all those people out. No, God did that one. And God remembers Noah. Well, guess what? God is with Noah, right? And it wasn't that he's sitting up there on some cloud out there going, in there in the middle of the flood. Oh, no, I forgot about him. I wonder how he's doing. Oh, poor Noah. No, he's right there with him. This remembering is a close protection of Noah. Okay. And then God promised the sign of a rainbow, not to send another flood again. That again is grace. So we see grace even in the midst of the flood, and that grace is available even for you. And so Noah's flood, factor reality. I think it's reality, and we better take it seriously. Okay, so tomorrow, not night, but tomorrow morning. Oh my. Tomorrow morning, we're going to talk about a bonus session. What about those dinosaurs and mammoths and the Tower of Babel? So that's tomorrow morning. What time? 10 a.m. Okay, we're going to give you a special bonus. So God bless. Hope to see you tomorrow morning. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jo for a few minutes and to anybody who has questions.
All right. I love that talk on the flood. I remember a time when we had first come into this whole debate, you might say, about creation and evolution. We started getting some scientific information about creation, and we came to the conclusion that there was way more evidence for creation than there was for evolution. And so we kind of switched along that line, but it was because of the scientific evidence, not the biblical evidence. Later on, we went back and looked at the Bible, and we went, how in the world did we think that the Bible could ever support evolution? Throughout the Bible, we see creation, and we see God as creator, all the way from the book of Genesis all the way through to the book of Revelation. But you know, when we first came across from evolution to creation, we still had not taken a good look at the age of the earth issues. And this whole idea, was this flood a reality, a worldwide global flood? Was it a reality or wasn't it? And I remember we had a pastor at that time. He was talking to us about the flood, and he knew Western Colorado, where we're from. And he says, don't you just see evidence of the flood all over Western Colorado? And we were polite. We didn't laugh, but we went home and we laughed, and we thought that was so funny. He believed in the flood and Noah's Ark and all those animals. Well, guess what? The next time we came back to Western Colorado from Alaska, and we went out on the desert here, you know what we found? Everywhere we looked, we saw evidence of flood. And it was like our glasses had been cleaned, or we got a new set of glasses or something, because we had been so indoctrinated and trained when we looked at rock layers to think millions and millions of years. And it took quite a bit of time for our mind to catch up with, wait a minute, there's another explanation. Is it possible even that those rock layers could be the result of the 1-year global flood that we read about in scripture? And so it took us a little bit of time to come over from believing in long age, local flood ideas to a global flood in a short period of time. And that took a lot of water, but not a lot of time to lay down the rock layers themselves and to carve out the canyons that we see today. And so here in Western Colorado, we see all kinds of evidence of that flood all over the place, some of which Dave showed you in this talk. But yeah, there's lots of evidence of a worldwide flood here in Western Colorado. Back east, there's evidence too, but like Dave says, it's all covered up by green stuff. And so we don't see that as much there. Well, we're going to also tell you about Yellowstone. There's lots of evidence of catastrophic geologic events in Yellowstone, and I think that's not even debatable. The hot springs, the geysers, all the thermal features, the impact of ice on the Yellowstone Park area in the glaciers, and the impact of flood waters carving out great canyons. Very much evidence for short ages and geologic catastrophic events taking place. We also like to include with that Yellowstone tour a shorter tour up to Quake Lake, which is a spot that in 1959 there was a terrible earthquake that happened, and as a result of the earthquake, there was a humongous landslide that came down off the mountain, and it blocked the river down below and even went up the other side of the canyon. And many people lost their lives during that catastrophic event. It was really scary, and I'm sure very, very scary for people that were there. But we can still see the evidence of that catastrophic event today when we look at the world. And so when we look at the Yellowstone tour, what we're going to be seeing is this lots of evidence of catastrophic geology, of flooding, of erosional features, and so on, as well as wonderful design in the animals and plants that you see at Yellowstone. So if you have not yet signed up or been on one of our Yellowstone creation tours, we invite you to come. If you're a part of this online seminar, we're offering a 10% discount. If you just let us know that you've watched these replays, if you're not on now or you are on live, and if you wanted that, let us know. The dates of that are August 26th through August 30, or September 2 through 6. We do 2 separate tours up there in the fall, and we use a Christian camp in the area. And we'll be going into Yellowstone and having a creation tour of Yellowstone. And we have also with us on those tours, it'll be Dave and myself as interpretive guides along on there, teachers, creation teachers, but we will also have experienced professional guides with us that have done many, many, many tours of Yellowstone and the Tetons. Alan and Diane Galbraith. And so we want to invite you to come. It's good for the whole family. It's good for kids and teens as well as retired people. So, you're all invited to come, and we just want to make that available to you. We also want to let you know we are contemplating doing another Costa Rica tour in the spring. And if you have any interest at all in that, we would love for you to contact us at AOI and let us know of your interest. That trip does involve a significant amount of financial outlay up front for AOI, and so we really need to know, are there going to be enough people that want to do it that it's worth us going ahead and reserving the rooms and the bus and the Costa Rican staff and so on. So let us know if you have an interest in the Costa Rica trip. couple of books. We have books available at the office or online. Take advantage of those. One of our favorite newest books about the flood is just called Flooded. And we found it to be an excellent book to help interpret the geologic structures that we see on the earth today within a biblical framework.
It also talks about the Ice Age and the Ice Age and other aspects of creation as well. But it's a very, very good book with lots of pictures. I like pictures.
All righty.
All right. I already mentioned that particular book, and we have a Discover Creation DVD series that you can pick up. And it's basically a special price, is $35, and that'll include a 75-page full color study guide book. It's amazing. Lots of good material, 12 different creation sessions as well. Fossil record, I talked about that yesterday. Very important book. So discover creation, worship your creator.